Yes, hello. Welcome to our history subject. It is me, Sandenani from Edukea Company. So we proceed with our discussion based on our topic, that is the establishment of colonialism in Africa. And we are nowadays discussing the subtopic of African resistances or African reactions. So previous session we discussed the forms of African resistances, by which we have discussed the different forms of African resistances. We saw active resistance as well as passive resistances. Again, we saw small scale resistance and large scale resistance. In small scale resistance, we said that those resistances based or practiced in a small area, the coverage was at a small area with a short period of time, while large scale resistances, they covered a large place as well as a long session of time or long time. And in small scale resistances, we have discussed the many resistances such as Hehe resistance, Nandi resistance, Yao resistance, as well as Nyamwezi resistance. So today we proceed with the other form of African resistance, that is large scale resistances in Africa. So this is our today's discussion. It is large scale resistances in Africa. So in large scale resistances in Africa, there are so many resistances which occurred at that time of colonial rule. So amongst of those large scale resistance is Majimaji resistances or Majimaji War, and this is 1905 up to 1907. So we may see that there is a name here, Majimaji. So you may find that others may say, no, it is a Kiswahili word. So this is a special name of this war, that is Majimaji resistance. So then don't say water resistance. No, it is only Majimaji resistance. But before looking on it, let us have this little introduction. It is not possible to recognize any simple pattern in African resistance to European rule. Samuel fought a long defensive battle against the French. Lobengula saw the futility of military resistance. People such as Nandi reacted immediately in a violent manner to the British advance. Other groups, having failed to put up much of a resistance at first, were persuaded to rebel against the European later, but often a rekindling of traditional religious belief was combined with armed rebellion. An example of such a revolt was the Majimaji Rising of 1905 to 1907 in Tanganyika, that is currently Tanzania. But historically, or in historical manner, we term it Tanganyika and not Tanzania, since Tanzania was formed in 1964. But at that time of colonial rule, we call it, or we term it as Tanganyika. So this was just an introduction of what we are going to discuss. But our particularly lesson is Majimaji resistance or Majimaji War. So the Majimaji resistance broke out in the southern Tanganyika against the German control. So this was the resistance which fought between southern Tanganyika societies against German rule. And this is a large and popular African uprising in Africa. It is amongst of large resistance as well as the popular African resistances. The term maji maji is derived from Swahili wet, that is maji, which means water. Maji maji was a magic, or that maji now, that water was a magic water drawn from the river of Fiji and mixed up with maize and millet flour. After mixing up, the water was thrown on the various fighters so as to protect them from German bullets in war. That is why the war itself is called the Maji Maji War or Maji Maji Resistances. Since during this war there was an assumption or beliefs that once you use that water, you protect yourself from the German bullets during the war. And the leader of the Maji Maji uprising was known as Kinjekitile Ngwale, who lived at Ngarambe in southern Tanganyika. He organized his followers and began to fight in July 1905. The Matumbi of Nandete in Rufiji were the first to take up armies. So this tribe, Matumbi, were the first tribe to take up action. While once they made their war, they started their war, other societies or other tribes then it came up to follow them or to help them. So this is Maji Maji War or Maji Maji Resistance. So it was southern part Tanganyika societies who fought against the German rule at that time. Maji Maji uprising was highly mobilized and its followers possessed courage as well as determination against the German rule in Tanganyika. It took a wide coverage and spreaded very fastly from Matumbi of Nandele in Rufiji to other areas like Uluguru, Masasi, Makonde Plateau, including Lindi, Mtwara, Songea, and Kilombero Valley, North Dar es Salaam, and the Mahenge Plateau. In these areas, African communities such as Zaramo, Ngoni, Bena, Mwera, Ngindo, Pogoro, Mbunga, Dendeule, Luguru, Makonde, and the others which I have not mentioned here, united together to fight against German rule. That is to say, Maji Maji combined different tribes, southern part or southern Tanganyika tribes who fought against German rule. Why did they fight? So they made this reaction because of the numbers of factors or causes. So let us now discuss those factors or causes of the Maji Maji resistances. So amongst of those causes, one was the forced cotton growing that was ordered by the German government in 1902. The Akidas were ordered by the governor to establish cotton plots where African communities of southern Tanganyika had to work with little pay or provide a free labor. They also worked under inhuman. This situation dissatisfied the people and decided to take up armies against Germans. So those southern Tanganyika societies were forced to grow cotton in their own land by the government, by the German government. So this made them, no matter they like or not, to grow this cotton. And mind you that cotton had unprofitable to them, and they normally forced to work under inhuman. That's why after being tired, they decided to take up action, and this action was a direct war, that is Maji Maji War. Another factor was forced labor. Forced labor. So forced labor was another African grievance. Africans were forced to work on railway construction as well as settler farms, and Africans were humiliated by the Germans and friends while working. Generally, the colonial treatment towards Africans was unhuman. So in forcing them, they were forced. Out of being forced, they were again punished. They were unhuman, treated. If they got tired while they were at the farm, and once they expressed their feelings, their interest that we are tired, then the body treatment or harsh treatment sticks were to fall on them. So because of this, then they got tired. That's why they decided to take up action, and this action is the war, that is Majimaji War or resistance. Another factor was imposition of heavy taxes and fines on Africans by the Germans. That is to say, taxation. Taxation from a word, taxes. Imposition of heavy taxes. So the taxes were unfair and had to be paid in the form of money. For example, the tax imposed for hat was to be paid in form of money for about 3 raps. So they had to pay tax, they had to pay money for their hat. So here Africans asked themselves that we have our own land, and on this land we built our huts or houses. Then those outsiders have visited for us. So while they have visited, then we have to pay tax on them. While in realistic, those outsiders were the ones who supposed to pay tax for us, since they have took our own lands or farms. So following those quotations made Africans to become self-awareness, to become mobilized, to be self-awareness. This made them into reactions, and this reactions was direct war, that is Majimaji resistance. The only way of getting money was through selling labor power. So they had to sell their labor power to the German to earn money to pay different taxes imposed. The collection of tax aimed at raising the revenue for the colonial administration, but this system was new to the Africans. But why did the colonial government decided to prepare or to make this tax? They made it in order to increase their revenue, government revenue, but they made it as the means of getting African laborers, since while the Africans were working on those colonial or German farms, they were lowly paid. So wherever they were paid, they had to repay it in form of tax to the German government. So they started taxation so as to make the constant labor supply on their farms. So the collection of tax aimed to raising the revenue of the colonial administration, but this system was new to the Africans, since Africans were not aware about it. They were also discontent because the colonialists used their land for production, while at the same time forced them to pay taxes. And this made the grievances as what the quotation I have talked here. The fourth point was German disregarded Africans' traditional beliefs and the practices such as dances and circumcision. They overlooked the African religious leaders and condemned sacred places as the areas of African witchcraft. The disruption of traditional practices disappointed the Africans, thus decided to stage resistance against Germans. That's to say, Germans were not regard African traditions, norms, as well as beliefs, religious, those Jambo and Unyago, and polygamy. So Africans then they were not satisfied after being interfered with their traditions. So this made or led to the Maji War. Other point was the hostility and harsh treatment of the people by the German appointees, such as the Akidas and Iliwalas. Akidas and their local police treated African people brutally. That is to say, brutality of the German appointers. So their ruthless ruling system also discredited Africans, hence lived like slaves. So by that time, Africans were treated very badly, and they lived as slaves. So this situation were not good for them. That's why they decided to take up action, and this action was Maji War or resistance. Another factor was African people wanted to regain their lost independence. Since most of the young men felt that they had lost their manhood by submitting to the Germans. The Germans' occupation at the initial stage involved different ways, which resulted into disunity among the Africans. Later, Africans realized the need to unite together so as to fight against the common enemy, that is German foreigners. So generally, African people lost their independence, lost their dignity and their humanity. Since by that time they were not regarded as the people of their areas or as the natives of those areas. So this made German to create strong enmity with those indigenous people as the result of Maji War or resistance. Africans wanted to oppose adultery, raping, and fornication exercised by German missionaries and their houseboys. These practices were crimes to African communities, and the offenders had to be punished. So those who opposed their daughters to be raped, they were punished. This was predominant among the Ngindo communities, but the Germans and their houseboys exercised all the practices that were regarded as crimes and disregarded the Ngoni taboos. So the local communities, especially the Ngindo, were discontent with these events, hence took up armies against Germans. So their wives were raped, their daughters were raped, humiliated, segregated. That's why they decided to take into action, and this action was direct war or resistance. Another point, the Ngoni people wanted to revenge for the killings of 1898. During the initial stage of imposing German rule, a large number of Ngoni people were murdered and their properties destroyed or taken by the German forces. So this event created bitterness, hence resulting into taking up of armies by Ngonis against Germans. So Ngoni were amongst of the tribe with under much bitterness of the German. So they just wanted to take up action. They just wanted to revenge for what German did during their establishing colonial rule. But the other point was the influence of Kinjekitile, who was an effective leader with the ability of organizing people, instilled confidence in the African people by requesting them to unite and take up armies against the German invaders. The Kinjekitile's force believed that there would be immune to German bullets, as the water sprinked on them would turn the bullets into water. That's why he introduced this idea, and the people believed in him as the result of having united and be serious with this war. So Majimaji resistance ended in 1907, and African forces were defeated by the Germans. Many fighters were killed, and those who survived lost the hope as the magic water had failed to protect them from German bullets. Most of the fighters escaped to Mozambique. Many were hanged, while others surrendered to the Germans. So why did those people being defeated during the wars or for the wars? So they are defeated because of the following causes. So these are causes for African defeat. Africans employed poor weapons such as arrows, spears, and outdated guns against their enemies, who used the superior automatic machines like machine guns. They also lacked the fighting skills, and they were poorly organized as opposed to their counterpart, the Germans, who were well trained and organized against those indigenous of southern part of Tanganyika. Also, Germany were supported in many ways, such as weapons and mercenary soldiers from Sudan, German, New Guinea, and Somalia. All these reinforced the German and led to emergence of large army which could attack Africans strongly and effectively. So because of this, made Africans to be defeated at this war. Other point, the Africans lacked the military communication infrastructures. They failed to communicate between one ethnic group and another. Every ethnic group fought in isolation in different areas, and their leaders had different motives and grievances. So this then made them to fail, to prove failure, since they were not fought at once. So every area, every village fought itself. Failure of magic water, that is the Majimaji, to turn German bullets into water and protect the African fighters. A large number of the warriors were killed during the war, hence others lost faith over their region. So this also made them to lose hope. So once they lose hope, then they surrendered, and the others escaped to the Mozambique and the other parts. So this gave German the chance that we are the winner, and then they put much emphasis, much effort until they won the war. Majimaji uprising covered a small area, hence failing to cooperate a number of African powerful communities like the Nyamwezi and the Hehe in the interior. These powerful communities could bring support to African forces. Immaturity of the resistance, since it was a small area resistances. So even other strong Tanganyika societies or communities which were very strongly were not participated at this war. A good example is Nyamwezi and Hehe. So if they could participate or join, maybe they could bring positive effects and bringing hope of this war. Also, the effect of scorched earth policy employed by Germans. This policy involved the destruction of African residences and destroying crops and the property, thus made Africans to have the problem of famine and hunger, which caused the death among the African fighters, since many of them were starving. They were starving, they had a hunger, no food. Then this made them to fail, and this is how Majimaji fighters failed because of those factors. Let us proceed with the impacts of Majimaji resistances. So Majimaji resistances had the numbers of impacts and We may discuss one after another, including Maji-Maji resistance made Germans rulers to reform their administration so as to avoid another uprising in Tanganyika. These reforms were made under General Lord Lutherberg. They also changed their attitudes toward Africans. Governor Lutherberg introduced some important measures to improve African services like education, health, farming and communication system. He also rejected extra taxation of Africans and abolished corporal punishment. The governor recognized the those traditional chiefs, stopped forced labor, and began to punish German settlers who mistreated the African workers. So, first impact was that Africa started to get relief, at least exposures, from being humiliated, segregated, overtaxed, as well as being badly punished by the German settlers. It brought together many African communities such as Gindo, Zaramo, Ngoni, and Matumbi to resist against the German invaders. That is to say, it united different ethnic groups of southern Tanganyika. It led to the destruction of properties. Since Germany used the scorched earth policy, which involved the burning of villages and the crops in all areas in African forces. So in most cases, those African huts, those farms, they were burnt by the German. A large number of Africans lost their lives. It is estimated that between 75,000 and 100,000 Africans, including their leaders and the soldiers, were killed by the German forces, while other people died of diseases and starvation. A large part of the southern Tanganyika became depopulated, that is to say depopulation or loss of lives. Maji-Maji resistance led to the emergence of severe famine and hunger. Since German soldiers destroyed farms and granaries during the war, this period of famine was known as Funga period among the people of southern Tanganyika. Since people concentrated much on war rather than production, Maji-Maji resistance led to the displacement of many African families during the war. That is to say, separation of many families due to the fear and insecurity. Many people escaped to different directions to look other areas of settlement where they thought to be peaceful. The war also influenced the family separation among the African communities. Also, Maji-Maji led to the foundation for nationalism in Tanganyika, because after uprising, Africa led a lot of and adopted new method of resistances against the colonial in Tanganyika and disregarded their ethnic differences. So it laid the foundation for the future resistances, since they learned a lot of things on how to make resistances, on how to react against their enemies. And that is to say, Maji-Maji war remained as the strong history of southern part of Tanganyika, since it showed how those communities were confidently, how those communities were actively, how those communities were seriously, how those communities were not ready to be oppressed, segregated, humiliated, exploited under the German rule. That is why they fought seriously against the German rule. So this was amongst of strong resistances in East Africa, including southern part of Tanganyika or that is currently Tanzania. So Majimaji, we have a task that is exemplify 6 conditions which made Southern Tanganyika societies to fight against German by giving 6 points. Thank you.
Purchase your tracks today.